There exists a kind of creature in this world, discovered by a few people but never proven to exist. We group these creatures together as unidentified mysterious animal, abbreviated as UMA. Hello everyone, welcome to the UMA series. In mainstream cryptozoology today, it's believed that in Asia there may still be some species with intelligence surpassing apes, primitive hominins, or even more archaic humans. Unlike North America, where humanoids are reported with varied forms, aside from differences in height and build, the relict ape men described in Asian sightings tend to look very similar. For example, India's Mandabarang, Bangladesh's Ban Manoush, the wild man of Shanongja, the Himalayan Yeti, and so on. Whether these beings are subhuman or some undiscovered large beast, the legends have become an indispensable part of regional culture. Today's topic is South Asia, the wild race in Sri Lankan folklore, the Nittaewo. Nittaewo, also spelled Nittaewo, are savages from Sri Lankan local folklore. They're usually described as a short, ferocious humanoid race, standing 0.9 to 1.2 meters tall, walking upright, covered with black or reddish-brown hair, with dark skin, shorter arms, and very sharp nails, like the claws of a predator. They have their own language, live in groups, and hunt small to medium-sized mammals. Ibn Battuta, a famous 14th century Moroccan traveler, from 1325 onward journeyed for nearly 30 years through what are now Kenya, Iran, Turkey, India, China, Spain, and 44 countries in total, virtually covering all the major regions influenced by Islamic civilization at the time, making him a pre-Columbian globetrotter. In 1354, after returning to Morocco, he recorded his travels in a work commonly known as the Rikla. He mentioned that on the island of Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka, up in the mountains there were black monkeys with long tails, and the males, like human males, had beards. Locals said these monkeys had a leader like a monarch, who wore a wreath of leaves on his head and leaned on a stick. When he was seated, the other monkeys could only stand behind him. They even held gatherings, collected food, obeyed orders, and beat other monkeys. Judging by the description, he may have meant Sri Lanka's endemic purple-faced leaf monkey. But the social behaviors suggest that if the account wasn't a fable, they were more like intelligent beings. Although no name was given, this may be one of the earliest written references to the Nittaewo. The first relatively reliable account appeared in 1886 in a scholarly journal by British official H. Neville titled Taprobana. In Bintene, the Vedda told him the Nittaewo were a race half-human, half-beast, living since ancient times in Panama Wapatu's Lanama. They looked like apes, yet shared similarities with humans, walked upright, were covered in reddish hair, had sharp, powerful claws, and sometimes descended in groups to steal dried meat from Vedda hunters. Fearing their claws, the hunters would hide. Based on other sources, the Lanama here refers not to the southwest Lanama, but to the Mahalanama cave region on the southeastern coast, and Vedda refers to an ethnic minority living in southeastern Sri Lanka. Later, an elderly Vedda hunter told Neville the Nittaewo were a cruel, savage people living in treetops in the Lanama area, building houses of leaves and branches. They had their own language and were highly aggressive, attacking any Vedda who entered their territory. Many years ago, the hunters' ancestors fought the Nittaewo, driving them into a cave and setting a fire at the entrance. The blaze burned for 3 days, wiping out the entire Nittaewo tribe. In 1915, Sri Lankan scholar Frederick Lewis wrote in his Notes on the Fauna and Flora of the Vedda country that his informant said the local Vedda had once been harassed by a race called Nittaewo. Each small band numbered about 10 to 40 individuals, roughly 3 feet tall. Females were shorter. They were naked, looked like ordinary humans, walked upright, had no tails, and lived in caves, hollow trees, or cliff crevices with traces from Bagura in the east to Kataragama in the west. Their arms were short but powerful, their hands strong. At night, they would surround sleeping animals and tear them apart with claw-like nails. The Vedda were also victims. The Nittaewo would cut them open while they slept. The two were eternal enemies, so the Vedda resolved to exterminate them. According to Lewis's informant, the Nittaewo died out about 3 or 4 generations ago. His grandfather's family took part in burning one of their camps. Lewis later visited 2 other tribes whose elders told the same story, suggesting the Nittaewo and the Vedda lived in the same era, but the former, lacking strong bows and weapons, were ultimately wiped out. In 1933, Sri Lankan writer Richard Lionel Spittel recorded in his book Far Off Things that during 2 weeks in the Lanama area, he learned the Nittaewo were shaggy-haired dwarves who attacked on sight and tore victims' flesh. They feared buffaloes and dogs most, and the Wehangala cave was where they were finally exterminated. In 1963, the Journal of the Royal Asian Society, Ceylon, recorded that Sri Lankan official L.B. Wickramasinghe led an expedition to the Mahalanama region to search for traces of the Nittaewo. At the Kudimbigala site, they conducted trial excavations, finding many mollusk shells, tortoise shells, and scattered vertebrae, foods the Nittaewo were said to eat. Although they found no small human skeletons, in the forest they stumbled upon a stone structure like a miniature megalithic site. Local Vedda said it was a Nittaewo altar. Unfortunately, the expedition photos are no longer usable. Wickramasinghe theorized the Nittaewo were descendants of Homo erectus. In 1997, U.S. Bigfoot researcher Bobby Short posted a report that Spanish anthropologist Salvatore Martinez allegedly saw Nittaewo in Sri Lanka in 1984, describing human-like beings with long body hair and scabbed patches of skin. It was the first time a scholar reported seeing such a creature, but details on the anthropologist are lacking, and scholars with the same or similar names show no record of visiting Sri Lanka, so the credibility is uncertain. Even so, Nittaewo sightings became comparatively frequent in the 21st century, especially in early 2019, when most online reports and interviews begin. In February 2019, a woman in Walasmula said she saw a Nittaewo dash into the woods behind her house, snapping branches. Dambana's Vedda chief Uru Varige said he'd heard his grandfather tell that the race was active in the forest about 400 years ago, formed societies, and that a few spiritual remnants may still survive today. Though translation from Sinhala may vary, alleged sightings appeared across southeast, southwest, and central Sri Lanka in 2019, while scholars still disagree on what the creature was.
One view is the unknown human theory. Professor Spittel thought the Nittaewo might have been early Negritos who settled in Sri Lanka, one of Southeast Asia's oldest human groups, including the Semang, Andamani, Mani, and others. Negritos resemble black people in features, but are generally small in stature. Adult males often under 1.5 meters, females even shorter, possibly due to drift, selection, and tropical rainforest adaptation. Spittel believed remnants still exist in southern India and once in Sri Lanka, but regime changes forced large-scale migration, these being the Nittaewo. He also suggested people might be mistaking sloth bears. Locals rejected this. Sloth bears, Melarcis ursinus, inhabit the region's forests and grasslands, males 1.5 to 1.8 meters long, with shaggy black fur and a pale U-shaped chest mark, eating termites, ants, fruit, and honey. A standing bear may be mistaken for a large hairy primitive, but cryptozoologist Bernard Heuvelmans argued both the Negrito and bear hypotheses fall short. Sloth bears rarely stand bipedally except when threatened. Their build makes long bipedalism tiring, and attacks on humans are rare. In 1945, Edinburgh primatologist William Charles Osman Hill conducted systematic fieldwork and agreed the Nittaewo could not be negritos, noting Vedda-Negrito intermarriage in Sri Lanka, especially around Tamankaddua, whereas the Nittaewo were at war with the Vedda and were notably shorter. In On the Track of Unknown Animals, 1955, Heuvelman suggested a gibbon, specifically the siamang of Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula, better fits. It's the largest gibbon, about 1 meter tall, 70 to 90 centimeters body length, with black fur and bouts of bipedal walking, mainly eating fruit, sometimes insects, and eggs. Though far from the Nittaewo's alleged bloodlust, Vedda accounts could have demonized enemies. Osman Hill considered a large gibbon reasonable, but also proposed an ape-man hypothesis as more plausible, citing many Asian hominins, Java man, Luntian man, Yuanmo man, Peking man, and suggesting Sri Lanka might have been a refuge, with arrivals around 5000 BCE surviving into the 17th and 18th centuries. The issue is that hominins were generally taller than the Nittaewo legends. Heuvelmans noted that hominins on Sri Lanka might have undergone insular dwarfism, species shrinking when confined to limited ranges, a pattern common in mammals, reducing ecological costs and aiding reproduction. Smaller bodies also dissipate heat faster in the tropics. The 2003 discovery of Homo floresiensis on Flores, Indonesia, averaging just over 1 meter tall, small brains, living as recently as 50,000 years ago, supports the plausibility of dwarf hominins in island settings. From the literature, scholars generally think the Nittaewo were either once real or an unrecognized species. Personally, if the Nittaewo truly existed as described, language, no tails, group social behavior, then an ape-man hypothesis seems most reasonable for an intelligent species. The problem is whether the legends are reliable. Superstition is fairly common in Sri Lanka. Astrology, zodiac beliefs, serpent cults, witchcraft, and religious cultural differences. Examples include beliefs that a rat's hind claws cause leprosy, an owl's hoot summons demons, or leopards become bloodthirsty during famine. These ideas still persist. So perhaps the Nittaewo were simply common primates, such as the purple-faced leaf monkey, but with expanding human settlements or long-term raiding of Vedda resources, one or more groups were wiped out. As for the 2019 cluster of sightings, they seem less credible. A creature gone for centuries, reappearing nationwide, would be unusually rapid even for an invasive species. Of course, that's speculation. As with the ape-man hypothesis, without systematic excavation in the Lenema area and without remains, no one can prove the Nittaewo once lived here as a hominin group. In the end, the unknown exceeds the known. That's the charm of UMAs. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching.